This film begins with a scene in 1879 at one of Japan's Yokohama train station, where the Japanese police commander named Saito Hajime is carrying out an operation to arrest a Chinese mafia boss named Enishi Yukishiro. Enishi is known to have illegally traded various weapons to the Japanese state for the past few years. He is also suspected of being a mafia that sold a warship to one of Japan's elite criminals, Makoto Shiseo. Therefore, the Japanese authorities have ordered Saito and the Japanese police to arrest Enishi for further investigation. After assaulting several police officers, he asks if the legendary Japanese Badosai still has the scars on his face. But because Saito didn't give any answer, he decided to run away from that place and jumped out of the train car. Enishi started attacking several police officers, creating a big mess in the train station and then fighting against some officers inside the train. Fortunately, Saito's troops managed to surround him in one of the trains, so he had no choice but to surrender himself to the Japanese police. Surprisingly, when the Japanese authorities handed Enishi over to the Chinese authorities, the Chinese consulate released him to maintain peace between the countries. Upon further investigation, it turns out that Enishi is one of the most influential mafia bosses in China and has some political support in the government. So it is not surprising that the Chinese government allowed him to roam free even though Enishi had been proven to be trading weapons illegally. On the other hand, Kenshin and Kaoru returned to live their lives peacefully after Makoto Shiseo was successfully imprisoned. In the evening, they have dinner at a food stall they usually visit with their friends. But shortly after they left the tavern with Sanosuke and Yahiko, Enishi and his men suddenly blew up the tavern until it burned. It is still unknown what Enishi's reason for doing all that is, but he is known to have a personal grudge against Kenshin. That night, a police officer invites Kenshin to investigate a suspected hill where Enishi's group prepared all the explosives. Unfortunately, they didn't find any evidence in that place apart from a paper containing a message saying human punishment. After seeing the message, Kenshin told the police chief that it was a message that a samurai or badosai would use to justify their massacres. After returning to Kamiya's dojo, where he lived with Kaoru, he was still wondering who the perpetrator of the attack on the diner was. On the other hand, Megumi and Sanosuke had just finished treating the victims who were injured in the explosion that night. He had asked Megumi about the scar on Kenshin's face that still hadn't disappeared even though the wound had appeared many years ago. Although she is not completely sure, Megumi has heard from a doctor that the wounds a samurai has from feelings of anger in the path of justice will never disappear until that anger is gone. The next night when Kenshin and Sanosuke were talking in front of Kamiya's dojo, a member of the dojo police headquarters suddenly appeared in front of them covered in wounds. The man said that their dojo had been attacked by a group of unknown people and that many dojo members had died due to the attack. Because of that, they rushed there to help save some of the other dojo members. On their way to the location of the attack, several police officers approached them and informed them that another attack had occurred at the police chief's house. Hearing this, Kenshin and Sanosuke decided to split up into two locations where Kenshin would go to the police chief's house while Sanosuke would go to the police dojo. Upon Kenshin's arrival at the police chief's house, he found that the person who carried out the brutal attack on the police chief's house was one of Enishi's men named Hiyoko. When Hiyoko was about to kill a family member of the police chief, Kenshin stopped the attack and fought against him. As a result, a fierce and dangerous battle between them happened. Suddenly, Hiyoko aggressively attacks Kenshin using two machetes on both sides, while Kenshin is still ahead despite only using one sword weapon. In the middle of the fight, Kenshin could corner him and disarm his machete, but Hiyoko could still counterattack with multiple kunai. In the end, Kenshin managed to defeat Hiyoko and make him suffer very severe injuries. Unfortunately, when Kenshin was careless, Hiyoko took the opportunity to blow himself up, causing the whole place to burn down. Seeing that, Kenshin feels very guilty when he knows other people suffering from someone's revenge attempts against him. On the other hand, Sanosuke also had to swallow the bitter truth because Enishi's men had slaughtered all the dojo members, and there was no one he could save. On the next day, Kenshin accidentally crosses paths with Enishi, who introduces himself as the younger brother of the girl who was killed by him 14 years ago. Enishi then recounted that he had deliberately moved to Shanghai and struggled to build a mafia organization with enough power to take revenge on Kenshin. Enishi reveals that he didn't kill Kenshin directly to make him suffer by hurting the people around him. After knowing Enishi's goal, Kenshin becomes even more restless because he has to imagine the people he cares about getting hurt one by one. On the other hand, the Japanese government authorities began ordering the Japanese police to tighten their security after the attack that killed many people. Meanwhile, at Enishi's headquarters, a Chinese politician named Heising came to Enishi to question the continuation of their deal. In the deal, Enishi had promised to hand over his organization to Heising once his goal of revenge was achieved. After Heising left, Enishi was reminded of an incident in the past where he tried to convince his older sister, Tomoe, to leave Kenshin because he is a very dangerous person. The next day, Kenshin decides to tell Kaoru and the others that the recent attack was an attempt by Enishi to take revenge on him. Enishi is the younger brother of a girl named Tomoe, Kenshin's late wife, who had died from a slash from Kenshin's sword. Kenshin revealed that Tomoe was the girl who had scratched his cheek just before she died 14 years ago. It turned out that their meeting began when he helped her from being disturbed by some thugs at a food stall. At that time, Tomoe, who no longer had a home to return to, decided to live with him, a Badosai from the rebel group. As time goes by, Kenshin begins to have feelings of love for Tomoe and wishes to always make her happy. She intentionally approaches Kenshin to take revenge for the death of her fiancé, who was killed by him. But as time went on, Tomoe began to feel comfortable being by his side and chose not to continue with her intention of revenge on him. Then they started to have feelings for each other and fell in love. Before Tomoe left Kenshin for the last time, she scratched his face so that he would always remember his promise not to kill anyone again after an era of peace was successfully achieved. At that moment, Enishi witnessed Tomoe's death and thought Kenshin intended to kill her. That's what triggers Enishi to do everything so he can take revenge on Kenshin for the death of his older sister, who he loves so much. After hearing that story, Sanosuke and the others couldn't help but fall silent as they didn't know what they could do to stop Enishi. While Kaoru, who began to feel for Kenshin, could only grieve in silence after knowing he had loved another girl sincerely. She thinks that Kenshin will never be able to open his heart to another girl or love another girl like he loves Tomoe. Knowing that Kaoru is heartbroken, Megumi tries to convince her that she can still love Kenshin by supporting him with all her heart. After that, Kaoru went to meet Kenshin to ask him to stay with them and find a solution to this problem together. She realizes that Kenshin intends to leave them because he doesn't want to harm her and the people around him. Meanwhile, at Anishi's headquarters, a samurai sword named Cho, who is Makoto Shisio's former subordinate, comes to Anishi's office and tries to steal his sword collection. Cho is now working on the side of the Japanese government after he suffered defeat in his fight against Kenshin. That night, he intends to challenge Enishi to a one-on-one duel because he cannot accept the insult given by Enishi for his defeat in the fight against Kenshin. Return to Kamiya's dojo, where a girl named Misao and a young man named Aoshi meet Kaoru to give Tomoe's notebook. They are bodyguards who used to work for an illegal opium dealer named Takeda Konryu. However, after Kenshin defeated Takeda, they decided to work for the Japanese police and help protect civilians. Misao confessed that she got the book from an acquaintance who knew Tomoe well, and the acquaintance asked her for help to hand the book over to Kenshin. In the evening, Enishi and his troops began terrorizing the entire Kyoto by spreading paper containing the words human judgment. Shortly after they spread the message, they attacked at several points in the city. One of his men, Kujiranami, blew up several buildings using an explosive weapon resembling a cannon fire. Kenshin, who saw what happened, tried to stop Kujiranami. Suddenly, the fight between them started. Fortunately, Kenshin managed to defeat him and destroy the weapon, even though Kujiranami's weapon was intentionally far superior to his. On the other hand, Aoshi and Misao are also fighting against another of Anishi's men named Moonhyoi. However, because the person targeted by Moonhyoi was Kenshin, he chose to blow up the place and run away. Unfortunately, due to the big explosion, Aoshi was seriously injured after he tried to protect the residents. At Kamiya's dojo, Enishi came carrying Cho's lifeless body because he had lost the fight against Enishi. Seeing Anishi's appearance in that place, Sanosuke tried to face him to protect Kaoru and the others. However, Anishi's fighting ability is far superior to Sanosuke's, so he can easily take down Sanosuke. Not long after, Kenshin, who had succeeded in defeating Anishi's men, ran to Kamiya's dojo to ensure his friends were all right. Unfortunately, when Kenshin arrived at the dojo, he found Sanosuke lying helpless with severe injuries from Anishi's attack. Sanosuke, who was in a dying state, told him that Enishi had taken Kaoru away from that place at this time. Fortunately, Kenshin found clues about Kaoru's location in the paper that was stuck in Cho's mouth, who was dead. The next day, Saito and the other police officers began evacuating the injured residents in the attack carried out by Anishi's troops last night. Many buildings have collapsed and burned to the ground, and many city dwellers have become victims of the attack. On the other hand, when Kaoru, who had just woken up, found herself in a strange house, she ran out of the house and tried to escape. However, she can't leave that place because the house is on a small uninhabited island. Not long after, Enishi approached Kaoru and intended to kill her because she had mentioned Tomoe's name. But for some reason, a part of him told him not to do that, so Enishi discouraged his intention to kill her. At the same time, Kenshin, still at Kamiya's dojo then, decided to leave for the location where Kaoru was being held captive. The next day, when Enishi returned to the inn, Heishin met him to fulfill his previous promise to hand over his organization to Heishin. Enishi, who felt that his time for revenge was near, decided to give his organization to Heishin from that day on. However, Heishin thought that Enishi deliberately gave up his organization that easily because the Japanese police already knew about the location of Enishi's headquarters. Hearing this, Enishi became very annoyed and chased Heishin and his men away from that place. Soon after, Heishin walked out of place and secretly planned to kill Kenshin. Right now, his main goal in seizing Enishi's mafia organization was so he could gain enough influence and resources to rule over the Japanese government. He also intends to kill Kenshin because he thinks that Kenshin is one of Japan's strongest samurai who can disrupt his plans. That night, Kenshin came to Enishi's headquarters alone without inviting his friends or the police force because he didn't want more people to become victims in the revenge conflict. He was forced to fight against hundreds of Enishi's men alone using only 2 swords whose sharp edges were reversed. Fortunately, in the middle of the fight, Misao and her friends came to help Kenshin defeat Enishi's men. She comes because she intends to avenge the person who injured Aoshi in the previous attack. Not only that, Saito and the Shinsengumi police force also came to the place with Sanosuke, who was still not fully recovered. Thus, Kenshin can find Kaoru's whereabouts and save her before Enishi does something bad. Upon Kenshin's arrival at Enishi's base, Heishin and his troops had prepared to surround him and intended to kill him. He had even hired the services of a samurai named Sujiro Seta to kill Kenshin and Enishi. It turned out that Sujiro used to be a former samurai sword under Makoto Shishio, who once managed to beat Kenshin in a fight. Unexpectedly, Sujiro attacked Heishin's men and intended to help Kenshin defeat Enishi's troops. Sujiro deliberately did all that because he had woken up after Kenshin managed to defeat him in their last fight. With the help of a great samurai like Sujiro, Kenshin finally defeated all of Heishin's men. Then Sujiro asked Kenshin to go to Kaoru's place while he would fight against all the remaining enemies alone. When Kenshin arrived before Enishi, he said that he could understand why Enishi wanted revenge so badly. He asked Enishi not to involve the people around him. At that moment, a fierce and dangerous duel between them began. At first, Kenshin managed to dominate the fight and even break one of Enishi's swords. But after Enishi took his other swords, he became more aggressive and eager to kill Kenshin. In the middle of the fight, Enishi said to Kenshin that the sins of a killer can only be redeemed by the killer's death, so Enishi asked him to end his own life. But Kenshin refuses to do that because, for him, the best way to make up for his mistakes is to protect the people around him, especially those he loves. After some time, the battle between them continued, and Kenshin managed to make several counterattacks against Enishi. Enishi, controlled by anger and revenge, stabbed a knife into Kenshin's body. Surprisingly, even though Kenshin saw Enishi's attack, he didn't try to dodge or put up any resistance at all. Seconds after Enishi stabbed him, he tried to meet Enishi's eyes and apologized to Enishi. Not long after, Heishin suddenly appeared and intended to shoot them both, but Kaoru ran and stopped him. Then when Heishin was about to shoot Kaoru, Enishi unexpectedly protected her with his body and allowed himself to be shot by a bullet. Enishi was annoyed that Heishin had interfered with his fight with Kenshin, so he pressed Heishin's body and intended to kill him. Seeing Enishi's rescue, Kenshin approached him and thanked him. It turns out that Enishi protected Kaoru because he saw his older sister's side in her, so he didn't want to let her get hurt. After that, Enishi couldn't help but cry while remembering his memories with his older sister, Tomoe. A few days later, Enishi was finally arrested by the Japanese police and imprisoned for all his crimes. While in the prison cell, he received a package from Kaoru in the form of letters and notebooks that Tomoe had left behind. In the book, Tomoe says that she abandoned her intention of revenge and prefers to love Kenshin because he is the one who has given her new happiness. Although Kenshin has killed hundreds of lives so far, Tomoe believes that he can bring peace to their country and protect more lives than the number of people he killed. She even sacrificed herself to protect Kenshin because he was an important figure who could bring a new era to the country. After knowing that everything Kenshin did was to bring peace to the country, Enishi could only cry and regret his actions that had claimed many people's lives. After everything was over, Kenshin and Kaoru came to Tomoe's grave to pay their last respects and show their gratitude because Tomoe was a figure who had helped bring peace to this country. The moral that can be learned from this film is that sometimes it takes great sacrifice to achieve a much bigger goal and be useful to more people.